There we go. Okay. So, so where did I leave off? I left off going through the Drake equation, and I stopped. Oh, let me share my screen. Well, let me minimize this. Bring this up. And go back to my, share screen. There I am. Okay, so here I was, and I said that we were talking about the Drake equation. And let me make this a little bit wider. There we are. So the last thing I talked about was the round function. And the round function basically rounds it to the nearest value. So let's talk about how we should name things. Okay, so one of the problems that we have with naming, let me go back here, I don't know why I closed that. One of the problems that we can have is when we're creating a program, and we create our variables, P, N, F, I, C, L. Well, that's great, right? As long as we remember what N is, as long as I can remember what C is. Now, when we're creating a program like this, and this program already has a kind of set of variables that are used, right? Then it makes sense for me to go through and name these the same as the standard calculation, the standard equation that is used for the Drake equation. And to use the same letter variables, and you can see that there are some capitals, there's a capital R, there's a capital N, there's a capital L. Right? And that's because that's taken directly from the Drake equation, which already exists. The problem we get into sometimes is that when we're creating our own equations, we're doing our own math, it's obviously much simpler to name something a letter. And it's simpler when we're getting input and doing value assignments for variables. And then it's easier to use those when we're doing the calculation or calculations with an S at the end. When I do this, like here I only have one line, right? But I might have 3 or 4 or 5 lines. It's difficult for me to move this over. And it's much easier for me just to type in a single letter here. Now, let me just ask you, what is the common problem with using individual letters? What do you think it is? What do you think the problem could be if I just use A, B, C, D, E, F, G when I'm creating an equation of my own? And you can either answer, or the chat room I think I have up. Yes, it's there. So what do you think? What do you think the problem could be? And it's only 26 letters. That's one, right? So we're limited to the number of letters that we can use. Now I can use lowercase and uppercase. It is case sensitive. So I have 52. But Patrick said it's hard to tell what it means. Patrick, did you take Visual Basic with me? I don't think Patrick heard me. Patrick said it's hard to tell what it means. and what that means is, it's hard to tell what he means, is that it's easy for us to forget what we're using, somebody took Visual Basic with me. I thought it was you, Patrick. It's easy to forget. What does E mean? What does E stand for? What is the value that's associated with the letter E? And how do I need to use that in my calculation? So for instance, if I'm doing a calculator where I'm going to calculate how much gasoline was used, right? So let's say that I have a program and I'm going to input, well, let's do this. Let's talk about what it is that we need to do to create a program like this. So I'm going to use an example. And let's come up with it together. So let's say that I want to create a program that's going to calculate how much it costs to go from point A to point B in a car, right? So basically I'm trying to find out, hey, I went to from my house to Disneyland. Oh, is Disneyland open? Oh, Robert's the one that took Visual Basic for me, with me. Okay, Robert, I'll remember. So you should be familiar with this program, Robert, so don't spoil it. Spoiler alert. So I want to just figure out, hey, you know what? I went to the beach from my house. How much did it cost me in gasoline to go from what happens to go to the beach? How much did that cost in dollars, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start working backwards, okay? So I'm going to start, because we have to figure this out from scratch, right? There's no help for me here. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to figure out what it is that I'm looking for. So the cost of the trip, that is my goal, right? That's going to be my end product. How much it costs, that's what I'm looking for. The whole program is geared to figure out how much it costs in gasoline, right? So trip cost. I'm not going to worry about wear and tear on the car and that it costs 5 cents per mile, you know, in maintenance fees and all that other kind of stuff that we use. So what do I need to know in order to do this? And by the way, I can do it on a whiteboard, which I have up, which is very convenient. So we can do it by hand. But what is it that I need to know? Okay, so hold on. So distance, right? So I need to know what the distance is. So how far did I actually travel in my car? What else do I need to know? Anne is good at this. The cost, and so is Jasmine. You guys are good. You guys didn't take my Visual Basic class, did you? Because it's the same example. I just came up with it. So the cost of gasoline. And how do we measure the cost of gasoline? By the gallon. Yes, Valerie. Excellent. So I'm going to put cost per gallon. And that's an O and not an E. Sorry. Only because I'm the teacher and I come up with the same damn examples because they make sense to me. It is not required. No, we don't even teach it anymore. This is the replacement for that. So we need the cost per gallon. I need the distance traveled. What else do I need? What else do I need to know? The miles is the distance. And very good. So the distance per gallon, yes, which is called miles per gallon. So if I look at this right here, these are the three things that I need to know in order to get to trip cost. The other thing is that I need to know well, I need to know one more thing, but these are the things that the user can input, right? So these are the things that the user is going to have to input at some point. So they're going to have to type this stuff in because this changes, right? The distance traveled depends on where I'm going, what the trip was. The cost per gallon is going to be unique every time. And, you know, we may have to average that a little bit in our heads. What did I pay? I paid $1.35 the last time I put gas in my car. So maybe I spent a little bit more or a little bit less previously, and that's mixed together, but I can kind of estimate that, right? The cost per gallon. And then the miles per gallon, my car will tell me what my miles per gallon was if I press the right button. So we can kind of get that also, right? And by the way, just as an aside, if you don't have a little trip calculator button that actually tells you what kind of miles per gallon you get, how can you figure that out? So let's say you have an old-fashioned car like my truck, which has roll-up, wind-up windows like this. I remember my daughter when she was really young. The first time she took a drive in my truck, she was trying to roll the window down. And she couldn't figure out how to do it. I said, no, you got to turn the crank by hand. And then she made this face. She was like 6. Why would I have to do that? Where's the little lever that makes it go up and down? Where's the little electric? Yeah. So anyway, so how could I figure out the miles per gallon of a car? Fuel receipts and map mileage. Okay, so actually, your odometer is pretty accurate. I would trust the odometer. It's okay. So the easiest way is, if I don't want to make a big deal out of it and try to figure out exactly how far I went, I would fill up my car with gasoline. Fill it up so no more goes into it, right? Then I would, at the gas station, press my trip mileage so that it's zeros, right? There's that little counter and you can reset it to zeros. And then I would drive a while. And it doesn't matter how long you go. The trick is, so let's say that I went 136 miles on my odometer. And then I go to the gas station again and I fill it up. Make sure you fill it up all the way, right, till no more goes in. And then you just look at the gas pump and it'll tell you how many gallons you put in, right? So 5.6 gallons or whatever it is, right? And then you just do the division. So if I do, if I get a calculator, and what is it, 136 divided by 5.6. So I got 24.28571428571429. So I got 24.23 miles per gallon. The trick is you have to know this. So you have a full tank of gas. You drive around till you don't have a full tank of gas anymore. And obviously, the more you drive, the bigger that number is, it's going to be a more accurate what do you call it, the average of the gas mileage. And then you fill it up again. So all the way full, and then you can just read off of the gas pump how many gallons it took to fill it back up again. Because you started with it, you know, full, you drove, you know how far you drove, then you fill it up again. That's obviously how many gallons you used. Does that make sense to everybody? Eduardo says, yes, it does make sense. So that's how you figure it out if you don't have a car that tells you automatically. And actually, the car is kind of doing the same thing. Well, no, it's not really. At least mine doesn't. But anyway, so we can figure out the miles per gallon. And I remember my dad had an old Corvette, and he knew basically what he got. He got like 16 miles per gallon. And so when he used to do this, and why would you do this? Why would you want to know how much it costs to go from point A to point B? What would be a practical use of this? My dad used to do it every week.
To see if you know if you need to stop for gas or not?
No, because there's that gauge. And usually it works. So that usually tells you when you need to stop for gas. Cannonball run stop points, so you can estimate how far you need to go. Yes. But why did my dad figure it out? Patrick, you should know this. I'm putting pressure on Patrick. Money? But why would I want to know how much money I spent? On driving around. Yes, business miles. My dad worked as a real estate agent, and so he could write off the cost of gasoline that he used when he was working on his taxes. It was a write-off. So he wanted to know how many, how much money he spent, and he kind of guesstimated it. But he would write down, I went to this address, and that was 7.2 miles. And then I went to this address, this house, and that was, 15.6 miles, et cetera, et cetera. And he had a little notebook that he kept in his shirt pocket. And, well, you know what, Angelina, you can kind of figure out. So my truck is retarded. It only gets like 17 miles per gallon. And so if I'm going to drive really far and I don't have to take the truck, I'll probably take my other car because it gets way better gas mileage. It gets in the, 30s or low 20s, high 20s, low 30s, depending on how I drive. So I can kind of guess which car to take without actually figuring it out, because I kind of know which one gets better gas mileage. If you have a Tesla, this is completely useless. But your trip cost is very good. So anyway, so let's get back to the program. What time is it? It's 10:30, so we have till 20, right? No, yes, till 11:20. Is that when we go to? I can never remember these times. I don't know why. We go from 50 minutes, 20. So we go till 20 after. Okay, so I'm good. Yeah, thank you, Valerie. 11:20. So I have these three things. So let me clear this really quick, because unfortunately this is not as big as a real whiteboard in a classroom. We usually have multiple ones. So what I'm going to do first is the user is going to input those values, right? So we have distance, miles per gallon, and cost per gallon. Okay, so what do I need to do first? What math do I need to do? And by the way, you should all be able to do this in your heads. It's just explaining it that's a bit of a problem. So explain the math to me, because we have to be able, in order to create a program that does this for somebody else, we have to know how to do the math. So explain to me the math. What do I need to do? So first I need to do, and let's split it apart. First I need to do distance, the distance traveled, and I need to do what to that? Marco, you have parentheses in the wrong spot. What do I need to figure out? So here, whenever we get stuck, yeah, you're correct, Anne. Anne is good at this. She must have had this example some. No, I'm kidding. So whenever you kind of get stuck, the easiest way that I find to do it is to enter simple values. So assign simple values to something. So let's say that I'm just going to do this randomly. 100 miles is what I traveled. And I'm going to say that my miles per gallon was 20 miles per gallon, and that my cost per gallon was $2 a gallon. Okay, so that's very simple values. You should be able to come up with a trip cost in your head, right? But we have to kind of decipher this. So in order to, what would my trip cost be? It would be, does anybody know what my trip cost would be? Just give me the answer. So Eduardo said 10. Eduardo, you are correct. So, but the trick is that I have to put this in math form. I have to do two calculations, really. I know that we combine them into one long one, but it's easier for clarity to do it in 2 lines of code. So the first thing would be that I need to figure out what? What did I, in order to get 10, what did I figure out? How many gallons I used to go that distance, right? So, and the way to do that is to take the distance and divide it by miles per gallon. And that equals gallons used. Correct? Now, gallons used is not user input. That is a calculated value that I need in order to do the next step. Because the next step is, and by the way, I'm doing it backwards, just like it would be in Python, in any programming language. I'm going to take gallons used and multiply that by the cost per gallon. And that's going to give me my trip cost. So here again is another calculated value. So I'm going to circle all of my calculated values, and by the way, this is the same. And because the gallons used is used in the second calculation, I have to do it in this order. I can't do gallons used times cost per gallon equals trip cost, and then do gallons used equals distance divided by miles per gallon. Because otherwise my gallons used has a value of 0, right? And then that doesn't give me the correct answer. So if you have problems kind of figuring out the math, sometimes it's easy to, or makes it easier to assign a simple value to each variable and then try to do the math, right? And if you can get the answer, then you can go back to this kind of form where we don't actually use numbers, because the numbers are going to be different every time, right? So this brings me back to when we name, we initialize, we use our variables. Would I use D? Now, in this one, it's still relatively simple, right? I'm sorry, I'm coughing, and it's because I think my drugs are wearing off. I'm gonna go have to take another set of drugs in a bit. So in this case, I would probably just do it this way. But it would be easier if I actually named my variables. If I have 20 variables that I'm trying to keep track of, then it's much easier if I say, instead of using GU as the name of the variable, I just type out gallons used. I type out distance. MPG, I think, is pretty good. We know miles per gallon, so I think I can use MPG. Maybe cost, I would do cost PG per gallon, because I think I can remember the per gallon. And then trip cost or total cost, I would probably type it out instead of just using the abbreviation TC. Because you have to think, a lot of times we're creating a program and we're doing stuff and we're working on things, and then by the time we actually get to the meat of the program, we've forgotten these things. And so then it's easier for us if you can just look at the name of the variable and go, oh, that's what it is. That's what I need to type in. So a lot of times, does this make sense? The reason, I would name the variables for the most part, instead of using like we could have done that by doing A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D, E. I need 5 variables, right? But then what's A, right? Then I have to remember A is the distance traveled, and B is the miles per gallon, and C is the trip cost, and then D is the, cost per gallon. What is each one? So you can see how, hopefully, you can understand how it makes it a little bit easier if we don't just use generic letter A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. Especially when we're coming up with our own. And by the way, if you do that, then you don't have to, let me go back to my share screen. Here I have defined what each variable represents. Right? But if I would have named this here, it's a little bit difficult because these are all very long. So I guess I could have named P percent stars with planets. Average planets so, you know what? In this example, it's probably easier to do the definition here, like this. Because the names that I can come up with still kind of are a little bit cryptic. Does that make sense? Because you can see that I'm going to have a hard time kind of you know, expected lifetime, I guess, would be easier to do for C. Planets with intelligent life. Yeah, again, I'm going to have to, you know, write most of this sentence. So I might as well just have this. So anyway, now there are a couple of things about, oh, by the way, we haven't done any numeric. Well, no, we did do a numeric. We did integers, right, which are whole numbers. So if I needed to do float, so let me close this. And am I sharing my screen? Am I sharing? Yes. Okay. So you can see this, right? Okay, good. So if I do float integers just mean that it has a decimal place. It can have a decimal place. It doesn't necessarily need to, but if there's a possibility that I can have a decimal place, then I should use a float instead of an integer. So if we look at my program that we just talked about, distance, should it be an integer or a float? So is it going to, how accurate? And by the way, this is something that as a programmer, we have to kind of come up with before we start writing the program. So are people going to say I went 7.4 miles? How accurate do we think the program needs to be? Or are they just going to round? And I will tell you this, my dad, when he was writing stuff down, he would round up and down because it makes life a whole lot easier, because he was doing all of his math with a calculator and he didn't want to do decimal places, and it was for tax write-off purposes. So, you know, if I go 3.7 miles, I don't think I'm going to get in tax trouble if I say I went 4 miles. It's just a little bit. So I think we could get away with an integer variable for distance. Miles per gallon. Again, my dad used to estimate because he didn't have a trip computer. So he used to guess, you know, 16, 18 on the freeway, 14 if it's really stop and go traffic. So he used to estimate, even with my trip computer, I would estimate, I would say, you know, 32 miles per gallon or, you know, 28 miles per gallon. So I don't think that we need to do a float there either, or that we would use a float there. Cost per gallon. I have never seen a cost per gallon that is a whole number. Now, by the way, if you're paying $2.99, gasoline uses how many decimal points in its price? How many decimal places, I should say, I'm sorry. Decimal places, because you're correct, it uses 1 decimal point, but how many decimal places? And Roberto said 3, right? But we see, and here, just look at we see this, 2.99. But then it says your decimal point's in the wrong spot, unless you have Patrick. 2.99 and 9/10, right? So there's always that little 9/10 that we kind of ignore. So if you're paying $2.99 and 9/10, right, there's 3 decimal places. How can you pay 9/10 of a penny? Right, you buy 1 gallon, they're going to charge you $3, right? So in that instance, when it's $2.99, they're going to, you could use an integer, but for the most part, we have to use a float for that. Because what happens if I press enter? Oh, it just says $2.99. So we'd have to use a float there. For gallons used, float or integer? He asked. Please play. Gallons used, float or integer?
Did we say gallons used was almost like it was a calculation?
It was a calculated value, right? So it was we produced gallons used by doing distance divided by miles per gallon.
Which like can both be rounded up, so maybe an integer?
So there's the thought process, right? So I said that we could do distance as an integer. And we could do miles per gallon as an integer, so whole numbers. So when you divide an integer by an integer, do you always get an integer? Angelina, that is not one of our data types. So when you divide a whole number by a whole number, do you always get a whole number? When you divide an integer, no, you do not. Eduardo said no. So if I divide 10 by 3, I do not get a whole number. So I have to use a float for gallons used. Otherwise, I'm going to be off by a lot, right? So the cost per gallon needed to be a float, and the gallons used needs to be a float. So that basically means that I'm not, right? So cost per gallon, if it's $3.49, I don't want to use an integer and round it to 4, right? Because that's going to be a 50-cent difference per gallon, which is a huge discrepancy. So, and the amount of gallons that I used, right? There's a big difference between, 3.2 gallons and 3.7 gallons. That's half a gallon. That's $1.50, depending on what my cost per gallon is. It could be even more, right? So I can't really use an integer value there. I have to use a float there too, just to keep, right? There's not a huge difference between 0.2 miles and 0.6 miles because I can in my head just round up or down. So, if I go 5.6 miles, if I do 6, it's not going to be a giant increase in cost or price. So those are the kind of things that we need to think about before we create the program. I haven't even written any code for it, right? I have to figure out the math. I have to figure out how many variables that I need. I need to figure out not only how many I need to figure out what is going to be user input and what isn't going to be user input. Then once I have that, I need to figure out the data types for each one. And most of the time we used, it's a user defined, it's a class. Most of the time we, we need to figure all of that stuff out before we even open some kind of programming language. Because we need to have those kind of basics nailed down. Now, the book talks about how to do, or the book talks about that there are limits in the range of floating point is what it's basically called, decimal data types, and that there's a problem with the precision, and that you can only go to 16 or 17 decimal places. For the most part, that's not a problem. For instance, with our gas calculator program. Oh, we're just talking about floats, which are decimals, and integers, which are whole numbers. We did talk, we haven't really, I mentioned string variables, which are just characters. We haven't talked about how to use them. But those are really the only three kinds of data types that we've talked about. By the way, it's time to look at chapter 2. So if you haven't already, look at chapter 2. It does talk about the limits in floating point representation, and I will be lecturing on chapter 2 for a while. So so what the limits are, when we're doing scientific calculation, we need very precise numbers, and they have to be more than 16, 17 decimal places. I can have a problem. It's good to understand that and maybe have workarounds for that. The book talks a lot about how to use exponents. So let me show you how to do an exponent and how we notate that. So we use the E as an exponent. So if I want to do 2 to the 10th power, that's how I would write that. And there's the answer. So let's do an easier one. 2 to the 3rd power. That's 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8, right? So I should get 8. No, I'm not getting 8. I'm getting 2,000. Why am I getting 2,000?
Isn't E like 10 to the whatever power comes after E? Yeah, so like you're doing 2 times 10 to the 3rd power.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So where is it? Where do they talk about exponents? String formatting, they talk about formatting first. So why? Yeah, it's 10. So I did that wrong. I'm sorry. I need to do, oops, I can't do it there. 2, it's different in Visual Basic. Is that it? No, that's 1. Okay, so I made a mistake. So I'll figure it out. I don't know where the hell it is right now. I can't.
Patrick's got the double asterisk in
Oh,
chat.
it's the
I don't
double.
know
Yeah,
if that
that's
works.
right. I'm sorry. Exponents are 2 multiplications. You are correct. Thank you for reminding me. I just couldn't think of it. That is the exponent. And so now I will get 8. Thank you.
Or you could have done PAL and then parentheses 2, 3.
Yeah, but that's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
That's a lot longer. So if I want to do 3 to the 2nd power, you can just do the multiplication twice. So 2 asterisks, and that will give you, so that's 3 times 3, right? So we do multiplication. So if I want to do 3 times 2, right, like that. So there you go. E is to the 10th, yeah. So I have to be careful about that. It's just because they were doing it as an example and I thought about it. So what we're going to talk about next time is we're going to talk about formatting our output. So when, for instance, yeah, we'll do that too. So that'd be a float actually. But if I do, I could do, what's it called? Mod. I could do mods. But let me show you if I want to format something. So I want to format my output. So let me do this. Let me do 5 divided by 7. And that's going to be my output. But I can format that. There's a built-in format function. And I could say, I want to format 5 divided by 7, comma, okay? And what comes after the comma is also, well, I could do 2, let's say 2 decimal places. And I did it, I screwed it up because I always do that. 2 decimal places. Oh, I didn't do 2 decimal places because I was busy. So that's 2 floats, 2 floating points, which basically will give me this. Okay, now it will round, and unfortunately it didn't have to round, it just rounded down. It did round, right? It rounded down, it didn't round up. But this part, because I used the format, this part, well here, let's do it again, dictates how many decimal places it shows. So if I do this again, and I just change the 2 to 4, you can see now it's showing me 4 decimal places, and the 3 is rounded. See the 2 here? There's an 8 next to it, actually, which is a 9. So it did round the 3. So it will round, and we can control our output by using the format. I'm sorry. Okay, so we will talk a little bit more about formatting. We'll talk a little bit about literals, which we kind of already talked about, but we will do it again. And we will talk about some control characters where we can force breaks, so we can, force some text to actually move down a line and start on that. Whether we want to align stuff to the left or to the right, or center it somewhere, we can do that also. So we'll talk about some control characters next time. And I will give you a assignment which will be something to the effect of something similar to kind of our trip cost calculator. I don't know. It's going to be something like that. Okay, so unless there are any questions, you may go and have a nice day, and I will see you guys Thursday. If you do have questions, I will stick around until everybody's gone. So have a nice day. No, our assignment is due. When is it due? Is the assignment due today? The 22nd? Yeah, I think it is actually.
Midnight.
It's midnight tonight, right? Yes. So 11:59. So good of you to wait till the last second.